Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Weeb Union, and in this one the Russians have managed to advance to the northwest of Sudzha in the Kursk region. The Russians have managed to capture the town of Nikolaeva west of Malaya Luknia. The Russians advanced further towards Kupiansk on the western bank of the Oskil River line in the eastern section of the front line, and the Russians have managed to advance south of Pokrovsk and west of Kursk as they continue their offensive operations towards the border area of the Dnipro Petrov region. Starting out in the Sudzha direction, the Russians have managed to capture the town of Viktorovka, gaining full control of the western bank of the Malaya Luknia river line. With this, the Russian forces will be launching further offensive operations towards Malaya Luknia from the northern flank and from the western flank. With the capture of Viktorovka, the Russians are now able to attack Malaya Luknia from the southern flank as well. The Russians are here looking to gain control over Malaya Luknia and then advance further towards Sudzha. According to some new reports, the Russians have reportedly started a new offensive towards Sudzha, attacking it from the western and eastern directions, combined with the frontline fighting near Malaya Luknia in the northwest and the fighting on the southern flanks from the southeast and southwest towards the supply line. It seems the Russians are here attempting to squeeze out the Ukrainian forces and force a withdrawal of their forces from the Kursk incursion. This is to avoid an encirclement of the Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainians would then need to abandon their Ukrainian Kursk incursion and withdraw through a point where the Russians will be able to attack them directly. The Ukrainians in this case would need to launch counterattacks on both flanks during this withdrawal to prevent the Russians from attacking them during the withdrawal. Otherwise, they would take huge losses during the withdrawal as Russians would be attacking the flanks. What the Russians really are doing is that they are keeping the Ukrainian forces within the Kursk incursion while they're attacking the flanks to encircle them. The Ukrainians have a choice between staying and defending, which would risk them being encircled, or withdraw, which would be under heavy pressure by the Russian forces both on the front line and on the flanks, which would cause heavy casualties. Therefore, the Ukrainians are in a very difficult position within the Kursk region, and there is no good solution for them right now unless they somehow manage to secure the flanks and make a safe withdrawal, which is unlikely because if they secure the flank, they would likely continue their Kursk incursion operations. Moving on to the eastern section of the front line near the Oskil River line, the Russians have advanced further towards Kupiansk by capturing a few forest patches here west of Kalinove towards Kinderashivka. With this, they are approaching the fortified positions north of the town, gaining control of which will allow them to start pushing towards Mela Shevchenko and Kinderashivka itself, as well as advancing further along the forest lines towards Holyobivka and gaining control over the areas along the Oskil River line. The Russians are here continuing their offensive operations following the Ukrainian counterattack to the north of Sudzha, where they are looking to strengthen their forward positions and continue offensive operations while also defending the flank at the same time. This shows that despite the Ukrainian counterattacks in the area north of Kupiansk and north of Sudzha, the Russians continue their offensive operations to expand their bridgehead across the Oskil River line. Further south in the direction of Pokrovsk, we see to the south of Pokrovsk there's been a lot of back and forth within Shevchenko. The Ukrainians first launched their counterattack to the northeast of the town to gain control over a foothold within the town, both alongside the road to the east of the town and alongside the northern parts, gaining control of the fortified positions at the outskirts of it and gaining a foothold within the town. They followed it up with an additional push from the western direction alongside the fortified positions there, gaining control of the fortified positions north of Shevchenko and getting a foothold in the western parts of the town. They advanced further towards the central parts of it, looking to gain full control of it. However, the Russians launched a counterattack to regain positions within the central parts and followed up with a counterattack to the eastern flank, where they managed to secure the cemetery area and the eastern parts of the town, and this knocked back the Ukrainian forces from fully capturing the town to only having a foothold in the northern parts of it. With this, a lot of back and forth taking place in the northern parts of the town, where the Ukrainians are attacking from the eastern and western directions, and the Russians are similarly responding by launching some counterattacks in both of these directions to push the Ukrainians out of the town. So we are seeing a similar case to what happened in Peshane to the northwest of Shevchenko. just on a larger scale, as the town itself is larger and more fortified. The Ukrainians are here taking advantage of their control over the fortified positions located south of Pokrovsk, and with the close proximity to the city itself, they have good support from FPV drones, while the Russians themselves, the closest town is Selidove, which is located over 10 kilometers away. This means that there's little to no FPV drone support for the Russian forces besides the ones in the towns and forest lines. This means that the Ukrainian support is much more concentrated. At the same time, the Ukrainians also have the firing positions behind Pokrovsk for their artillery, while the Russians have a difficult time putting them closer to the front line. The Ukrainians are making use of the proximity to the city to launch these counterattacks and improve their positions. The objective is to prevent the Russian advance on the western flank of Pokrovsk, which is aiming at cutting off both the supply lines west of Pokrovsk before storming the city itself. The Ukrainian counterattack near Shevchenko is unlikely to be the last one. The battle will continue until an outcome is decided over the town. If the Russians regain control of it, the Ukrainians will attempt different areas, such as Zelene, which has the Solony River to its rear, Lysivka, as well as further positions here to the east, where they've been trying to regain control over Novorodivka since the Russian capture of the town, but have been unable to do so. We'll also likely see further Ukrainian counterattacks from the direction of Vodashne following the Ukrainian recapture of the town, and especially to regain control over Kotline, which is now being surrounded from three sides from the eastern, northern, and western directions. However, the Russians do have control over several fortified positions to the east of the town, which means that it is still fairly secure from the Russian point. If the Ukrainians manage to gain control over Shevchenko, they'll likely push further south alongside the railway towards Vidroshenya and towards Novotroitsk and Novopustinka, where the objective would be to gain control of both of these towns, which will cut off the Russian grouping here to the northwest. Further south, here west of Kurhove and to the south of Pokrovsk, the Russians have managed to advance near Bohdanivka, gaining control of this forest patch south of Zaporizhia, as they continue offensive operations in the western direction towards the Dnipro Petrov Oblast. The border area, we see that the Russians will likely continue along the forest lines here to the south of Zaporizhia and Sribne towards Bohdanivka, gain control over the town, to then move onwards towards Troitsk, both from Zaporizhia itself and from Bohdanivka to the south. The Russians will also likely launch further offensive operations north of Zaporizhia towards Preobrazhenka from the northern and southern flanks, and then push onwards towards Kotlyarivka to the northwest and Troitsk from the southwest and towards Horyhovo along the border area. This will allow the Russians to gain control over several towns here alongside the Dnipro Petrovsk border area and cut off the connection between the northern and southern parts from the Dnipro Petrovsk region and the Donetsk region and push towards Novopavlivka. The Russians will likely look to expand further westwards away from the city of Pokrovsk because the Ukrainian defenses near Pokrovsk are very powerful. However, the further the Russians move away from Pokrovsk, the weaker these defenses will become. That's why the Russians will be looking to advance further westwards. Gaining control of Novopavlivka and Mishova will allow the Russians to significantly weaken their supply lines going towards Pokrovsk and significantly strengthen their western flank and flanking maneuver around the city. The Russians will then move further alongside the northern flank towards Lovianka to gain control of that as well, which will create a three-town wall between Pokrovsk and the Dnipropetrovsk region as well as the Zaporizhia region. This will completely isolate the city of Pokrovsk from the western flank and allow the Russians to advance on a wider front towards the rear of Pokrovsk, which is much less fortified, and cut off the main supply line from the northern flank as well. This will almost completely cut off Pokrovsk from supplies. There are still some supply lines here further north along Pokrovsk, where they will be able to supply through the fortified positions and defensive wall here on the flank of Pokrovsk. The Russians are looking to gain control over this defensive line between Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk, but even beyond that, there's an additional line that the Russians would have to capture to cut off the supplies. However, from the western flank, it is much weaker and much more vulnerable, and this is why the main push of the Russians is from the western flank of Pokrovsk, and this is why the Ukrainians are putting so much effort to counterattack, because this is the area where they are vulnerable, so they have to compensate the lack of fortified position with their armed forces launching constant counterattacks. In the direction west of Kurhove, the Russians continued offensive operations within Constantinople itself, where they're looking to regain full control over the town. Despite the Ukrainian counterattack to regain positions in the southern parts of it, the Russians advanced further in the northern flank, connecting with Andrivka along the river line and Ulakli from the eastern flank. This will likely allow the Russians to gain control over the remaining parts of the town within the next few days. However, we could also see a similar scenario to Uspinivka, where the Ukrainians constantly launch counterattacks, which would prevent the Russian capture of the town. However, the Russian positions here are much more powerful than in the Uspinivka direction, as they have Andrivka, the northern flank, located on the high ground with fortified positions, and with control over the eastern and southern flank as well. They have surrounded Constantinople from 3 directions, where in the direction of Uspinivka, they have control over the fortified position to the north of the town. However, it is an open field with little to no cover. In the east, they have control over Novovasilivka, but the Ukrainians also have Novoalexandrivka and Novoserhivka. And to the south, the area is a gray zone. This shows that the Ukrainians have much better control over the surrounding area of Uspinivka than in the direction of Constantinople. This is why I believe the Russians will likely have a much better advantage and ability to gain control over the town fairly quickly. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.